door. It was 6 p.m. and getting dark. She was dressed nicely for a dinner, but she didn't want the neighbors to see that. It wasn't dinner with her husband, Ronnie, who was away in Philadelphia for a math conference. Instead, Myra was meeting an old friend, Cochran Devlin, who she often called Cock. Coincidentally, he was in town while Ronnie was away. A few days before, Myra had agreed to go out for dinner with him. At the time, Cochran didn't know about Ronnie's trip, but he still only invited Myra. All three of them were 30 years old and had gone to college together at Mid-South Tech, graduating 8 years earlier. Myra had said yes to Ronnie's marriage proposal during their senior year, but at that same time, she had turned down Cochran's offer. Everyone found it quite surprising. Myra was a lively brunette, tall and strong with dark brown eyes. She made a strong impression when she arrived at college. She was smart and had a busy social life. Her good grades didn't suffer, even though she had a secret relationship with her young history professor, Jerry Wilson. They had a brief affair, although Jerry was married with 2 young daughters. They thought they were being careful, but about 10 weeks in, Jerry's wife, Alice, accidentally walked in on them at a bad moment. Alice pulled Myra away and confronted Jerry. The argument was intense. While Jerry tried to explain, Myra quickly gathered her clothes and ran out, slipping on her dress as she left. She stopped a block away to put on her pink sneakers. Myra worried she would face serious trouble for this. But the next day, Alice came to her dorm. They took a walk across the tree-lined campus. Alice, not as tall but very fit, told Myra that she needed to stay quiet about Jerry so he could keep his job. Myra could complete her history course without signing up for more classes with him. Myra agreed. I understand. I will miss him. Alice looked at her sharply. Miss him? Myra paused and said, He was good to me. Alice frowned, saying, Oh no, he's mine. You can't have him. Myra thought and replied, Maybe I still have a hold on him. And you too, in a way. You bitch! Take it easy, Alice. I'm taller and stronger. Alice stepped back, uncertain about who's stronger. Myra smiled. I have Saturday mornings free. I'll come by. You can have the kids busy for a bit, just 2 hours. It's not much to ask. Myra stepped closer to Alice, standing over her. Alice didn't move back and looked up at Myra's face. Myra noticed something in Alice's gaze. She knew what it was. Well, Alice, you can stay and watch if you'd like, Myra said, her voice trailing off. Alice was shocked by the whole situation but felt a strange excitement building. She whispered, I'll ask my mom to take the kids for the weekend. She looked down as she said this, then glanced back up at Myra, her head slightly tilted and her eyes bright. Myra patted her head gently and said, 9 o'clock then. She walked away, thinking about how Alice would explain this to Jerry. No matter, she had bigger things on her mind for the weekend. Jerry wasn't her first, but there was something about him that made her want more. That's why she had pushed things with Alice. It seemed to Myra that her plan had worked. She went back to her dorm and thought about how she could make the most of her new situation. She started laying out her strategy. In the midst of all that planning, she paused to gather her thoughts and relax. Saturday morning, Myra arrived at the Wilsons' house at exactly 9 a.m., wearing a simple one-piece dress and sandals. Alice opened the door, but Jerry was standing a few steps behind her, looking a bit uneasy. Alice, however, seemed calm. The three walked into the living room. Jerry had called this room the parlor, where he had been with Myra once before. Myra quickly took control of the situation as soon as they entered the room. She pointed to the couch and said, Sit. The couple followed her instructions. Myra stood over them, taking her time to observe them. Both Alice and Jerry were dressed casually in t-shirts and shorts, barefoot. The silence in the room created a tense atmosphere as Myra's eyes wandered from one to the other. Then, noticing Jerry's nervous energy, she spoke to him with a slight smile. You're looking good, Jerry. Why don't you stand up? Jerry hesitated for a moment. He had been anxious about this meeting, knowing that it could change everything between them. But there was something thrilling about the unknown. Jerry, 34, was a fairly ordinary-looking man. He had brown eyes, curly hair, and a striking face that had earned him plenty of attention over the years. His marriage to Alice hadn't stopped that completely, but it had slowed things down. He loved his wife and their family, but sometimes he found it hard to resist the temptation of young women like Myra. Since Alice had caught them together, Terry began to question whether he had pursued Myra or if it was the other way around. Despite her age, Myra seemed to him to be very confident and mature. Terry felt tense as he sat on the couch. He realized he had no control, neither in his marriage nor with Myra. Oddly, this lack of control affected him deeply, so when Myra told him to stand up, he hesitated only for a moment. He removed his t-shirt and let his shorts drop to the floor. He looked down, his face flushed. Myra chuckled and glanced at Alice. "What do you think, Alice?" she asked. Alice understood where this was headed and responded, "He looks so submissive." Myra turned to Terry. "Are you submissive, Terry?" she asked. Still looking down, Terry quietly answered, "Yes." "Do you like being submissive, Terry?" Myra asked. "Yes." "Good, because now you belong to me," Myra said, "and I sometimes enjoy a man who knows his place." She walked a little distance away and then said, "Kneel and come over here." Without hesitation, Terry followed her instructions. He knelt at her feet, feeling humiliated, especially with Alice watching. Myra told him, "Lie on your back." Terry obeyed and noticed Alice looking at him with a strange mix of emotions. But before he could think too much, Myra stood above him and confidently placed her foot on his chest. She glanced down at him with an air of control, savoring the moment. She then turned to Alice. "Alice, take off your top and shorts," Myra instructed. Alice followed the command without a word, removing her clothes until she stood in her undergarments. "Now, Alice, stand over here," Myra said, gesturing toward Terry. Alice stepped over, trying to contain her laughter as she stood near Terry, who felt the weight of the moment. After a brief pause, Myra said, "Let's all go to the bedroom. Terry, follow us." Terry obeyed, crawling behind them. When they reached the master bedroom, Alice and Myra were already close, sharing a quiet moment together. Terry stood by, watching awkwardly. Myra then ordered Terry onto the bed. She joined him, making it clear who was in control. "You belong to me now," Myra said to Terry. "And when I'm not around, Alice is in charge. No one else, understand?" Terry nodded, barely able to speak. Myra smiled, satisfied with the situation, knowing she had the upper hand. Then she got off the horse. Alice was in the bathroom. Myra told her, "Alice, Terry is here for you now. He'll do anything you ask. Right, Terry?" Terry agreed. "Yes, Myra." "I'll watch for a bit," Myra added. Alice went to the bathroom and grabbed a wet cloth. She tossed it to Terry and said, "Freshen up." "Sure, Alice." Terry used the cloth to clean himself. Meanwhile, Myra quietly encouraged Alice. "You should take charge, Alice. This is your chance. If you do well, he'll always be yours. Make him serve you." Myra saw Alice sit on the bed and turn around. She sat down facing away from Terry and instructed, "Go ahead." Terry followed her command. Alice made soft sounds of pleasure. Myra smiled and watched as Alice enjoyed herself while Terry continued. Eventually, she turned around and sat facing him. Myra watched as Alice experienced joy again. She briefly worried about Terry being overwhelmed, but he was fine. When the moment ended, Alice got on top of him and shared another intimate moment. Afterward, she moved back to sit on his face again to finish up. Myra felt excited about what she witnessed. Once Alice stood up, she and Myra shared a friendly embrace. Myra enjoyed the moment but didn't want to take it further. Alice seemed interested, but Myra stepped away. As Myra put her dress back on, she glanced at Terry. He looked a bit messy. She grinned and gently patted his head, saying, "Good boy." Alice giggled. Then Myra left. It was 10 in the morning. She needed to tidy up because she had a coffee date at 11. The person she was meeting was another freshman, Cochran Devlin. Cochran was tall and fit, with long reddish blonde hair and a deep voice. He used to excel in many sports in high school, but was now playing goalie on the soccer team. He felt he wasn't good enough for basketball or baseball at the university level and didn't want to risk getting hurt playing football. He received a partial scholarship for soccer, and while a full scholarship was available for football, his family was financially stable, so it didn't matter much. His dad discouraged him from playing football due to the risks, while his mom, a big football fan, was disappointed by his choice. She discussed it with him, saying, "The soccer team doesn't even have cheerleaders. Don't you want that?" Cochran smiled at her. She had been a cheerleader in college, and although his dad had attended the same university, he was not an athlete. Cochran got his height from his mother's side. Cochran replied, "I would enjoy having cheerleaders, but I'll be okay. I'm surprised you're worried about it." His mom said, "I just want you to have a good time." "Like you did?" She blushed and answered, "What I did before meeting your dad is not your concern. Cheerleaders are popular. They have many people interested in them." "Okay, Mom. I'm going to try to gather a group. I never had any issues in high school." He then walked away. The soccer season kicked off in August and wrapped up by Christmas break. Cochran played a lot, even as a freshman. He was one of 2 players who took up the goalie position in matches, with a 3rd player available if needed. Typically, there were 2 matches scheduled each week. Cochran's weekend was going to be busy, starting with a coffee date with Myra. He had played a game on Friday, and there was no practice that weekend. This left him time to catch up on schoolwork, alongside a Saturday evening outing with a cheerleader named Nora Miller. However, he was curious about Myra. She was tall, strong, and pretty. At 6'2", he appreciated when a woman could stand beside him without seeming small. They had met at an off-campus party the week before where they talked, shared phone numbers, and planned the coffee meetup. Myra wore jeans and a sweater with heels to match Cochran's height. They sat at a small round table in a quiet corner. Cochran smiled and said, "I'm glad we can chat. It was tough to talk at the party." Myra smiled back, saying, "Me too. Do you play soccer?" "I'm the goalie. I played defense in high school, but never in goal." He laughed and said, "Myra, you look like you could handle those forwards easily." She looked a bit surprised, but smiled. He noticed her reaction and added, "I really like that about you." She replied, "Well, I have to admit I like tall guys like you a lot, especially you." She reached out and gently touched his cheek. They both understood the connection. Cochran decided to cancel his date with Nora Miller. He and Myra walked off campus to a nearby motel using his credit card, which was supported by his parents. From the moment they met, there had been a strong attraction between them. Sometimes that feeling stays strong, while other times it can fade. When they were together, their connection only intensified. They embraced each other tightly. Cochran whispered, "Let's go." They moved to the bed, and Myra welcomed him. He was careful and gentle as he came closer, but she was eager and pulled him in fully. She breathed out, "Let's go." Though their first moments together were brief, they were filled with excitement for both of them. After a moment, they lay next to each other, their breaths returning to normal. Myra chuckled and said, "I have a nickname for you." "What is it?" "Cock. I think I'm going to call you that." "Has anyone called you that?" she asked, as she playfully touched him. He started to feel good again. He replied, "No, not to my face, maybe just dumbhead." She leaned closer and whispered something silly as she kissed him. After some time, they were close again, taking it slow at first. But soon, things got more exciting, and they both enjoyed the moment. They were both getting carried away, nearly falling off the bed. At last, he let out a sigh of relief. They spent the night together, taking a break to grab burgers from a diner nearby. The next morning, they started again. Myra wanted more, and he did too. They skipped church that Sunday. At just 18, they had both had other experiences. Myra had dated Terry and a couple of others, while Cochran had been with several girls before. None of their pasts compared to the time spent in the motel. By Sunday evening, they were tired from their adventures and returned to their dorms to study. Myra felt sore all over, and Cochran did too. After class on Monday, Myra decided to go see Cochran play soccer. She cheered loudly for his team as they played against the Tigers. Cochran did great, making 6 saves, and they won 2-0. After the game, he waved at her but had to attend a team meeting later. The pause in their meetings gave Myra time to think about everything that had happened. They planned to meet again on Wednesday after his practice, when he borrowed a room from a teammate who was recovering from an injury. Myra quickly realized she wasn't in love with Cochran, and he likely wasn't with her either. She liked how he looked and felt, but she barely knew him. She decided she didn't want to be exclusive with him. She still had her connections with Terry and Alice and felt excited about the options she had. She planned to see them that Saturday morning as arranged. Wednesday came and they had the room for the night. They enjoyed it, just like before. On Thursday, they met for coffee and lunch. While at the table, she asked him if he thought they were exclusive. He hesitated before saying, "Maybe we're too young for that." She smiled back. "I agree, but I still want to keep seeing you. How about you?" "Absolutely. You're great so far. And you're fun to watch in goal. You look good in your big gloves." He laughed. "Not so much for my match tomorrow." They planned to meet again the following Sunday. This became a routine for them. Every Sunday afternoon, they would meet in a rented room for some fun. Myra also kept in touch with Terry and Alice. Alice had control over Terry, and Myra was in charge of both of them. It was a tough change for Terry, but he didn't say anything. Both women knew he enjoyed being led. Sometimes, while in class, Myra would catch herself looking at him. He would try to hide behind his desk. One day, after class, he asked her to stop in his office. She made him feel small and humiliated. As she left, she told him, "I'll stop when I decide. Don't talk back, and clean up after yourself." Having control over Terry and Alice made Myra feel powerful, almost as much as her meetings with Cochran did. After their encounter, she went to her room feeling pleased with herself. During the Christmas break, she reconnected with a guy she had seen last summer, but when classes began again, she divided her weekends between time with him and managing her responsibilities at school. She knew she had to keep up with her studies. One of her classes was statistics, required for her psychology major. After a few weeks, she realized she was getting behind. There were 12 students in her class and a teaching assistant named Ronald Crowden. He was a bit cute, slimmer than her, with sandy blonde hair. However, he seemed a little nerdy. She approached him for extra help. He nervously agreed. He had also been thinking about Myra since the first day of class. Now that she needed support, he felt excited about it. "Of course," he said, stumbling over his words. She noticed he seemed quite shy and possibly a little nervous. "How old are you, Ronald?" she asked. "I'm 18, he answered. "Oh, how did you end up as a teaching assistant in this class?" "I did really well on the math placement tests, so they let me skip ahead. I needed some extra money, so I accepted this job," he explained. "I help out in this class and 2 others." As they chatted, Myra noticed she was a bit taller than Ronald. She said, "Well, can you help me out?" "Absolutely," he replied, glancing down. Myra smiled, but she wasn't looking for anything more than help with her statistics homework. "Can we meet at the snackery at 7? She asked. "Sure, I can do that." So now nicknaming him Ronnie, she met with him regularly for study sessions. They met 3 times a week for 2 hours and added Saturday afternoons as a test approached. As they spent more time together, Ronald became more relaxed around Myra. They started to joke and became friends. Myra enjoyed Ronnie's company. Not only was he smart, but he also had a good sense of humor. After their 3rd Saturday session, she mentioned going for a run. "How far do you plan to go?" he asked. 5 miles, she replied. "Can I join you?" Ronald asked, eager to keep the bond they were forming. Myra laughed at his enthusiasm. She said, "Do you just want to run behind me and look?" Ronnie replied, "Maybe, but I'd be happy to let you run behind me too." Myra laughed. "All right, how about we meet at the recreation center in 10 minutes? So they started running. Myra was a fast runner, but Ronnie was even faster. He easily kept up with her and was not even out of breath. Myra decided to speed up, and Ronnie ran next to her, chatting about his quirky math professor. He didn't notice how hard she was trying to keep up. Eventually, Myra stopped. She bent over, trying to catch her breath. Ronnie asked, "Are you okay? Maybe I ran a bit too fast. After what you said, I didn't want to fall behind." Myra let out a small laugh while trying to recover. She stood up and took Ronnie by his arm, turning him to face her. "How can you run like that? You don't look tired at all." He shrugged and said, "I run a lot. It helps me relax, and I'm good at it. I swear, I'm not out of shape at all." Myra noticed how firm his arm felt. It wasn't huge, but it was strong. She stepped back to look at him properly. It was the first time she really had a good look at him. He usually wore baggy clothes, but today he had on a fitted shirt and basketball shorts. She realized that he was quite slim, but had noticeable muscles. Myra said, "I always thought you were cute, but now I see you're not just cute, you have a tough side too." He chuckled and replied, "I always try to be strong around you." He glanced down, seeming a bit shy. Feeling a spark of interest, Myra asked, "Are you flirting with me, Ronnie?" He looked up at her and nodded. "Yes." She checked around to see if anyone was nearby. The closest people were far away. She stepped closer and put her arms around him. She felt his strength and gave him a soft kiss. Then, stepping back, she said with a smile, "I'll think about it." After that, she turned and jogged away, with Ronnie following her back. As she ran, Myra looked back at Ronnie. She understood what he was doing and felt good about it. She started to enjoy herself more, picking up her pace a bit. She was both amused and curious about what might happen with Ronnie. Once they reached her dorm, Myra took a seat on the steps at the entrance. She asked, "Did you enjoy running behind me?" "Definitely," Ronnie said, seeming more confident than before. Myra continued, "So Tuesday is our next tutoring session. Maybe we can switch locations. I'll let you know." She gave him a quick kiss on the cheek before going indoors. Ronnie stood there, a bit stunned, then finished his run and headed back to his room. Ronnie wasn't inexperienced. He was shy around girls and had been shy throughout high school. After graduation, a classmate of his older sister Melanie came to town for an internship at a law firm. Her name was Linda Harmon. She was short and a bit on the round side, but had a beautiful face and a lively spirit. Melanie talked to Linda about Ronnie. Melanie was concerned that Ronnie was heading off to college without much experience in relationships. So she asked her friend Linda if she was interested in spending some time with him during the summer. Linda, who wasn't from the area, agreed but mentioned she wasn't fond of casual encounters. The next day, Melanie introduced Ronnie to Linda. Both women were in their early 20s and had known each other for a while. Linda had a room above a local restaurant, and she invited Ronnie to join her there. Ronnie was shy but not unaware. Linda made him feel comfortable, talking to him about how she was looking for someone reliable to spend time with over the summer. They grew closer over the next 2 months, spending a lot of time together. Linda appreciated Ronnie's kindness and willingness to learn, and in return, he became more confident. Ronnie was thankful for that summer experience, as it helped him become more comfortable around women. The following Sunday was Cochran's day to spend with Myra. They often spent the day together, enjoying each other's company. By the evening, they would both feel relaxed but worn out from their time together. Myra was usually busy during the week with her studies, so they only saw each other on Sundays. On Saturdays, Myra had other commitments. Cochran, meanwhile, had his own schedule. He balanced his studies, playing soccer, and spending time with 2 other women, Lori and Elaine. Lori was a senior teaching assistant, and Elaine was married to an assistant dean. Elaine's husband was aware of her meetings with Cochran, which took place at their house, and even allowed it to happen. Over time, Cochran became more comfortable with the situation and learned from the experience. On Tuesdays, Myra had arranged to meet Ronnie again at her off-campus apartment. She liked Ronnie's intelligence and quick humor, especially after he became more relaxed around her. She wasn't expecting much from their time together, but was still curious about where things might go. As they walked to her apartment, Myra said, "Ronnie, I know you like spending time with me. After that run, I thought we could see how things go and maybe study a bit later." Ronnie smiled and said, "I'm really excited." Myra had expected Ronnie to be inexperienced, but she was pleasantly surprised. He was attentive and considerate, making their time together even more special. They continued to grow closer, sharing a deeper connection as they spent more time together. He changed his position several times. Each time felt better than the last, and after the third change, she felt amazing. That was when Ronnie joined her. Myra was both surprised and pleased. She wrapped her arms around Ronnie as he was close to her and covered his face with soft kisses. When she did that, he felt even more excited. Sensing this, she playfully flipped him onto his back and enjoyed the moment for a long time, surprising him in the process. After a while, they both relaxed on the bed, taking deep breaths. Finally, Myra said, "You're not what I expected, Ronnie. You're much better than I thought. I thought you might be a bit shy or finish quickly." Ronnie replied, "I've only been with one girl before. Now it's 2. Myra raised an eyebrow. "But a lot of times with her?" "Yeah, quite a bit." "You seemed so shy, Ronnie. I mean, before we came in here." "I am shy, but you're so beautiful, so enchanting." She kissed him softly and said, "I have some food and drinks." They enjoyed a meal and shared a drink, but they didn't focus on studying that night. Myra and Ronnie spent their Tuesday evenings together for the rest of the spring semester, along with 2 study sessions each week. Myra ended up getting an A in the class. She also kept meeting with Terry and Alice on most Saturday mornings. On Saturday nights and Sundays, she was with Cochran. His formal soccer season had ended, but he was busy in a spring league with other teams. He balanced his time well with school and Myra. Ronnie eventually learned about Myra's other relationships. She told him about Cochran right away and, later on, asked him to keep it a secret as she shared about Terry and Alice. During summer break, Myra and Ronnie went home. Cochran traveled to Scotland to train with a local football team, gaining experience with skilled players. Ronnie's friend Linda returned for another summer job at the law firm. They quickly rekindled their friendship. Although she wasn't quite like Myra, she was around every evening. Myra was only available once a week. So Ronnie and Linda spent a lot of time together and grew closer than the previous summer. Ronnie thought Linda was lively, and she found him enjoyable to be with, even if he was a bit shy in social settings. They went out for meals and dancing. Ronnie was energetic on the dance floor but needed some style. Linda took it upon herself to help him, encouraging him to be less shy and more carefree. Ronnie's parents had been surprised by his friendship with Linda the previous year, but this year they were less shocked. Ronnie was working at a local computer repair shop 4 days a week and dedicated one day to a rigorous workout routine. And he started to work out. One other thing he did was create a simple computer game and sell it to a national company. It was a spy game. He earned a nice amount of money from it and could make even more if the game became popular. Myra had a deal with the son of a restaurant owner in her town. She also had a friendship with a man who worked at a Chevy dealer fixing trucks and another neighbor whose wife had left him. That's another story. By late August, Myra, Ronnie, and Cochran went back to school. Myra saw Terry and Alice, but they agreed to take a step back and meet once a month instead. Myra planned to move in with Ronnie, who had rented a 1-bedroom apartment near the math building. She was also going to spend weekends with Cochran, who had a room above a candy store. He returned to school with a motorcycle, a Harley. When he arrived at the candy store, he revved the engine for her. She liked the feeling of the bike when she sat behind him at a certain angle. As the fall semester began, Myra and Cochran grew closer, although sometimes he felt tired. He was the main goalie this year and still had responsibilities with the assistant dean's wife. Ronnie only had Myra. On weekends, he focused on creating a new, more complicated game while settling into life with Myra. He couldn't say he was pleased with Cochran, but he chose not to think too much about it. Every Thursday night, Myra and Ronnie would go out for activities like dancing, movies, or plays. Myra had several female friends who sometimes joined them. On weekends, she went out with Cochran, attending parties or football games hosted by his teammates. They became quite a popular couple on campus. No one paid much attention to Myra and Ronnie. Myra felt content with both of her relationships. Cochran enjoyed spending time with his 2 women, especially Myra, while Ronnie was happy only with Myra. Ronnie had friends in the math department, all of whom were quite nerdy. Ronnie had some nerdy interests too, but his relationship with Myra kept him balanced. Time passed, and summer approached again. Ronnie's girlfriend Linda got a job at a law firm in his town and was also in law school. This limited their time together, but they managed to stay close. They seemed to be a good match and weren't looking for anyone else. Ronnie found their relationship calming and steady during the summer. Myra's parents took her to Europe for most of the summer. She found some company there, but not as much as she would have liked. Cochran spent the summer training in Scotland. He had a chance to stay and play for a team there, but he chose to come back for another year. Myra was a big reason for his decision. She had visited him in Scotland while her parents were in London. Cochran had asked a friend to give them space for a couple of days. However, Myra knew him well and suspected he might not be alone during that time. In that, she was correct. Cochran was training at a professional level in Scotland, building his strength and speed. To his hosts, he was an exciting prospect. To the Scottish girls, he was simply charming. Back at school, the 3 fell back into their usual routine. Ronnie was glad to see Myra, but sad to leave Linda behind. He wasn't pleased that Cochran had returned, as there were whispers that he was going pro in Scotland. But no. Myra and Cochran spent their weekends together, becoming somewhat of a well-known couple around their school. Ronnie noticed that Myra enjoyed the attention that came with being with Cochran. To him, that seemed to be what brought them close, rather than any romantic aspect. However, he didn't know much about that part of her life since she didn't talk about it much. Still, he had a good idea of how their local fame influenced their relationship. Cochran had an amazing fall season. His team made it to the semifinals of the NCAA tournament. A surprising mistake by the team kept them from reaching the finals. Myra was thrilled by Cochran's success in his junior year, and even Ronnie felt excited by the end. The mistake was disappointing to the fans, but Cochran was no longer just a local hero. Then he left school. He signed with Cincinnati FC in the MLS, where the season started in late February and ran until October, or longer if the team reached the playoffs. Cochran went to Cincinnati right after Christmas. He called Myra to share his decision. He would earn good money and hoped to impress scouts for a chance to play in Europe. Ronnie was sitting with her when she heard the news. As soon as they hung up, she began to cry. Ronnie held her gently while she sobbed, though he stayed calm. Myra was strong, though. She and Ronnie became roommates, and she thought about replacing Cochran for her weekends, but ultimately decided against it. She worried that if she did, Ronnie might end their relationship, and she didn't want that. He felt like a steady presence for her, so they decided to be exclusive for the spring. Ronnie chose to stay at school for the summer because of a project with a respected math professor. Myra went to Cincinnati. Cochran had invited her to spend the summer with him there, and she agreed. A week before she left, she told Ronnie about it. She expressed that she missed Cochran, but assured him she would return to school in mid-August, hoping he would still want her back. Ronnie replied, "You know I'm here for the summer. I've made plans. No more Linda for now." Myra responded, "I guess I need to sort some things out, Ronnie. I care about you." "I'm not sure I've said this enough, but it's true." He smiled softly at her. "I've told you before." "I know. I'll come back. I just want to see what it would be like to spend more time with him, not just on weekends." "And if it's good? Are we done?" No way. We have our senior year left here, I promise." Ronnie focused on the math project. He was working with Brenda Larson, an assistant math professor. Brenda was really smart and only 26 years old. She was close to getting a permanent position. She had dark hair and looked serious most of the time. She usually wore slacks and a long-sleeved shirt. She recognized Ronnie's talent in math and asked him to join her for a summer project. They started working together in her office 2 days after Myra moved to Ohio. They worked hard all week, eating fast food and getting about 5 hours of sleep each night. One afternoon at the end of the week, Brenda asked Ronnie, "What does your girlfriend think about all these late hours?" "She doesn't know. She's in Ohio." Brenda raised an eyebrow. "With the goalie?" "Yep." Brenda often thought about Ronnie's relationship with the beautiful Myra. She figured that he must have something special about him, something that wasn't obvious at first glance. This made her curious. She wasn't interested in women, despite what some people said. Brenda said, "Maybe we should take a break." She gave him a look that made it clear what she meant. Brenda had a nice face, and her smile was impressive when it appeared. She was about 5'3" and maybe weighed 100 pounds. Ronnie felt a little unsure. He didn't want to mix work with personal matters. Brenda then took off her long-sleeved shirt, revealing that she was quite attractive. His doubts faded. He took off his own shirt and shorts as well. Brenda laughed, but she clearly liked him. She quickly removed the rest of her clothes. Then she came closer to Ronnie, who caught her and spun her onto the couch. He was about to lean down, but she said, "Let's just be together." So they embraced in an intense way. Brenda seemed very excited, and it had been a while for her. Ronnie held on, and they lost track of time. Eventually, he pulled back and sat on the couch. He began to worry because she had been quite loud. Brenda noticed and said, "Don't worry. No one's here. And if they are, it's not their concern. You've really impressed me, Ronnie." Ronnie leaned in and kissed her gently. When he sat back up, she smiled and said, "Our first kiss." She laughed softly. "Hopefully not the last," he replied. "Oh no, definitely not the last." Then she sat up and kissed him again, settling onto his lap. They shared soft kisses until he felt ready for more. After a moment, Brenda shifted and positioned herself comfortably. They took their time, ending in a rush of excitement. Afterward, Brenda stood up, looked at him for a moment, and said, "Time to freshen up and get back to work." They both took a moment in her small bathroom using some wet cloths. It was 3 in the afternoon, and they worked until 6:30 without any more interruptions. Brenda focused on the task, and Ronnie followed her lead. Surprisingly, they made a lot of progress together. Brenda found that working straight through the day was fine, but work after dinner rarely went well. So she suggested, "Okay, let's eat." They went to a pizza place and shared a big veggie pizza. They were both very hungry. Once they finished, Brenda looked at Ronnie and asked, "Your place or mine?" They decided to go to his apartment. They spent the next few hours getting to know each other better before Ronnie fell asleep. The next morning, they shared a brief moment together, then went to a diner for breakfast. After breakfast, they returned to work. They both noticed that their connection was benefiting their project. For lunch, they had sandwiches from a nearby cafe. By 6:30, Brenda thought they had reached a good stopping point, but Ronnie was still working on an equation at her chalkboard. He held up his hand, signaling her to wait. He added some symbols, and when he turned to her, she was focused on the board. Excitedly, she jumped up and added a line. They both stepped back and started celebrating, hugging each other. The project wasn't finished, but they had made a significant breakthrough. They did a bit more work, but it was mostly just tidying up. As they left the building, Brenda said, "You know we're both going to be quite successful soon." Ronnie realized this in a new way after she said it. He hugged her again, and they went out for dinner together. Once they returned to her apartment, they enjoyed each other's company. Afterward, Ronnie whispered, "I've never felt as connected to anyone as I do with you now." She started to tear up. "Ronnie, I'm married. My husband is overseas with the Navy. I never expected this would happen, but I won't leave him." Ronnie was surprised. "So, are we doing something wrong?" "No. I have the freedom to explore while he's away for a long time, and he has that freedom too. His name is Joshua." "When will he return?" "Late August." "Oh, are we going to continue seeing each other?" "Yes. If that's what you want," she said. Well, it did seem to help with my math. Then she playfully jumped him. Meanwhile, Myra enjoyed her relationship. She often joked that it was good for a girl to have someone special. The joke never got old, but the spark in their relationship started to fade. Cochran was away a lot for work and had to practice daily. They went out together now and then, becoming somewhat of a well-known couple. People snapped pictures of them when they were out dancing or eating. Myra understood that Cochran was the one getting most of the attention, but they looked great together. When Cochran was away, Myra started to feel lonely in Cincinnati. She had been keeping in touch with Ronnie through messages and emails. They had always been honest with each other, and he shared news about Brenda. "Myra, I'm definitely coming back for my final year. I get bored here quite often. When I was with you, I didn't feel that way at all," she told him. Ronnie replied, "When you were with me, you were also with Cochran and the professor. Not in the spring, and I won't be seeing anyone else this year. All right, we'll see how it goes. But Myra, if you start to feel bored, you have to let me know. Don't just... I promise I won't betray you, Ronnie." And she kept her promise. Ronnie and Brenda had recently worked together on a project they sold to a big computer company, becoming quite successful. In August, Joshua returned. A week later, Ronnie was invited for dinner and felt a bit anxious. When he arrived, Brenda greeted him and led him inside. Joshua stood nearby, tall and broad with a big dark beard. His face was serious as Ronnie entered the room. Brenda introduced them, and Ronnie felt a bit uneasy, but then Joshua laughed and extended his hand for a shake. "No hard feelings, Ronnie. We don't keep secrets here." They shook hands, and Ronnie felt a bit overwhelmed. Despite the initial nerves, they had a wonderful evening, thanks to some fine wine and a tasty veggie lasagna. Ronnie knew that Brenda didn't cook, so it was all Joshua's work, and it was delicious. As they enjoyed dessert, Joshua said, "Ronnie, I hear we're all going to be quite wealthy." Ronnie replied, "It looks that way. The deal is signed, and I received an initial payment." Joshua turned to Brenda and asked, "Would you have achieved this without Ronnie?" Brenda answered, "No, I don't think so. At least not this quickly." Joshua then asked, "What about without the other activities?" Ronnie felt a bit anxious. Brenda said, Those activities were really helpful. They helped us relax, you know. Joshua said, Brenda told me about that moment of discovery. I must admit I was never jealous before now, but to be truthful, I feel a bit envious of that. That's different. Ronnie was starting to feel uneasy. He said, Joshua, it's a bit of a different situation. The intimacy was nice and it might have helped a bit, but the big realization had nothing to do with that. Even if it hadn't happened, the moment would have arrived just the same. Joshua was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded and replied, I understand. Thank you. Ronnie wondered if Joshua and Brenda had talked about this before he arrived. If they had, why was it coming up now? If they hadn't, why not? He decided to let it rest for the time being. The evening went well after that. Myra was set to return in 3 days. It was also announced that Brenda was taking some time off to go to England with Joshua. He had been assigned there to help link the two navies. Brenda would be working at Oxford during that time. Ronnie wished them good luck. He went home to wait for Myra, but he felt quite down. If things had been different, he might have wanted to stay with Brenda for good. Myra arrived in a rented van 2 days later. She came in at 8 p.m., locked the van, and went straight into the apartment. She ignored the dinner Ronnie had prepared and took him right to bed, spending a lot of time there. She was eager to reconnect. Ronnie had little say in the matter. Myra was simply making her presence known in his life again. It was 2 a.m. when there was a break. Ronnie felt completely worn out. Myra noticed and decided to let him rest. She could have continued all night, but she thought a pause until morning would be kind. This made her smile, but Ronnie didn't see it. Over the next week, they talked about their summers with other people. Sometimes the discussions were tense, sometimes full of love, but they were important. Myra concluded, Ronnie, I love you, not Cochran or anyone else. And Ronnie replied, I love you too. I care about Brenda and Linda as well, but you're my top priority. Myra smiled and took him to bed again. For Myra, being close with Ronnie was different than with Cochran. Each had their good points. Cochran was intense and often focused on himself, which sometimes excited Myra, but could also be overwhelming. Ronnie was always caring and sensitive to what made her happy. Since her needs changed, Ronnie's approach adjusted each time, and she always felt fulfilled with him. One thing, though, was that he wasn't as big as Cochran. Myra was taller and nearly as strong. Most of the time, she liked that about Ronnie, but sometimes she missed the other. Ronnie wasn't as assertive as Cochran either. Myra could never have pulled Cochran to bed as she did with Ronnie when she returned for the summer. He would have taken charge and then fallen asleep. Myra and Ronnie remained committed to each other throughout their senior year. Ronnie kept in touch with Brenda through email. He also checked in with Linda, who was planning to marry a lawyer from her workplace. Myra and Cochran mostly communicated via email. When he visited D.C., he wanted to meet her there, but she said no. She wanted to see him, but she remembered her promise to Ronnie about their senior year. Actually, Ronnie was in graduate school, but hadn't graduated yet. Every weekend, Ronnie took Myra out somewhere. Dancing was her favorite activity, but they also went to the theater, movies, and even camping. Myra loved to dance, and Ronnie had gotten pretty good at it. Myra attracted a lot of attention on the dance floor and danced with different men, but she only danced once with each, keeping things light and friendly. Ronnie didn't mind as long as the guys were respectful. Twice, she ran into guys who were not polite. She handled one without any trouble, but the second man, who was much bigger, wouldn't take no for an answer. Ronnie stepped in to protect her. He used a beer mug to defend Myra when the man tried to pull her out of the booth. Ronnie almost faced serious trouble, but fortunately, the venue had security video to clarify what happened. After that incident, Myra hurried him home and was very affectionate with him. That was when Ronnie decided to take some self-defense lessons during his spare time, even though he never really needed to use them later. Cincinnati FC's season ended just before Thanksgiving with a loss in the playoffs. Cochran had a remarkable first season as a professional player, achieving the best goal prevention statistic in the league. He developed a great sense of the game, which helped him make amazing saves that looked simple to some but were quite skilled. Experienced observers noticed his talent, even if the average fan did not. In early December, Cochrane accepted an offer from a Scottish team he had been linked to for the past 2 years. This team was in the middle of their season. They started with 2 skilled goalkeepers, but one was injured, and the other seemed a bit too seasoned. So Cochrane moved to Edinburgh. His new team had a passionate fan base, though they were not quite on par with the 2 major teams in Glasgow. Still, he gained quite a bit of fame when he took over as the main goalkeeper and performed well. As in his earlier times in Scotland, he caught the attention of many fans. He kept in touch with Myra, mostly through email and occasional phone calls. The season concluded for him in late April, and he returned right away to school. He informed Myra that he was back, and she shared the news with Ronnie. Cochrane had made up his mind that Myra was the one for him, and he planned to propose. He arrived on a Wednesday morning and rented a condo because he was going to train with the Tech soccer team for the rest of the term. He called Myra and invited her to dinner on Friday, and she agreed. Myra felt really mixed about everything. She found it hard to decide, which was unusual for her. On the other side, Ronnie felt nervous about what would happen, but he was also a bit weary of the situation. Ronnie and Myra found themselves at a crossroads. She had to make an important choice. In the week leading up to Cochrane's return, Ronnie thought carefully about their situation. He decided that if Myra could promise to be faithful to him, he would propose. However, if she spent time with Cochrane after telling him their senior year would be just for them, he would have to walk away. He understood how hard that would be for both of them, but he was running out of patience. He wanted to marry her and start a family, but only if they could be exclusive. To him, that was what marriage meant, even if it seemed a bit old-fashioned. On Thursday evening, Ronnie made his feelings clear to Myra. She hesitated. The weather was chilly for an April night, even though it was nice outside. On Friday, Ronnie went to his teaching classes and held office hours. He had finished his master's degree and was offered a job in the mathematics department, which he planned to accept, no matter what Myra decided. Myra thought about her choice. By the afternoon, she was almost sure about what she wanted, at about 95% certainty. She dressed casually for her dinner with Cochrane at a laid-back restaurant near his new condo. Taking a cab, she met Cochrane, who arrived in a classic red Thunderbird convertible with a white top. His place was just 3 blocks away. The restaurant didn't have a valet, but he had someone to handle the parking. He brought Myra a single rose as he greeted her outside. Dressed in neat gray chinos and a black silk shirt, he tried to kiss her, but she turned away and said, "No, but you look great." Still, Myra couldn't ignore how much effort Cochrane put into the evening. She sensed he wanted her to come to his condo and stay the night or even the weekend. This thought made her slightly uneasy. They sat in a booth by the front window, ordered drinks, white wine for her, craft beer for him, and talked about Cochrane's past seasons playing in Cincinnati and Scotland. He was thrilled about his achievements, and his excitement was clear. Myra enjoyed listening to him. Then, he asked about her senior year. She kept him updated through emails and occasional phone calls. She shrugged and replied, "You know I'm graduating soon. College life has been good. Ronnie got a position with the math department and is going for his doctorate soon." Cochrane frowned slightly, but the waitress arrived to take their food orders. They both chose salmon, hers sautéed, his crusted. They got another round of drinks. As they ate and shared memories, Cochrane reached across the table to hold her hand. A tingle ran through Myra as they touched. She looked at his serious face as his large hand covered hers. He said, "I want you to marry me, Myra. I love you, I always have since our first year of school. We can live in Edinburgh." Myra shook her head slowly. She was taken aback by the proposal and felt tears starting to fall. Cochrane misunderstood her tears. He reached into his pocket for a ring he had prepared, but Myra stopped him and said, "No, Cochrane. No. Ronnie is in my life. I love you, but I love him too. We just fit together." Cochrane understood that she had feelings for Ronnie. He realized that she cared for him a little too, so he kept the ring in his pocket. He said, "I understand, Myra, but please don't rush your decision. I know I've surprised you. I'll be around for 2 months. I know you thought I was just trying to bring you back to my place, but I want more than that. Please think it over." Tears were still on Myra's cheeks. She didn't want to hurt him right then. She nodded and said, "I'm surprised. I need time to think, but please don't be shocked." She stood up and he stood with her. He said, "I'll give you a ride home." She replied, "No, I'll walk. I need the time to think." She turned and left. It was a mile walk and it was 9:30. She returned to the apartment at 10. She couldn't remember much about that walk. Ronnie knew where she had gone that evening. They had talked about it. Myra had promised to return to him after just dinner to let Cochran know she was no longer interested. Ronnie hadn't been able to sit still since she left. He worked out on a chin-up bar and did push-ups. He paced around, waiting. When he saw Myra walking towards the entrance, he was ready as she came up the stairs. She ran to him, crying, and they hugged in the hallway, slowly turning around. Once inside, Myra said, "He proposed to me." Ronnie looked at her. "And what did you say?" "I said no, but then he asked me to think about it. I didn't turn him down right away, but I want to be with you." She hesitated, realizing how important her next words were. Ronnie stepped to the mantel and picked up a small box. He said, "I had plans to ask you in a very special way, but he got to you first. So, I love you, and I want us to get married." He opened the box to reveal a beautiful ring. Myra took it, gasping with joy, and began to laugh and spin around. She put it on her finger and said, "Well, I guess." Then she jumped into his arms and they both landed on the couch. Ronnie and Myra shared a joyful evening together. However, in the morning, Myra started to think about how to tell Cochran about her choice. She asked Ronnie for advice. He said, "Meet in person, but in a public place." When she thought about this, she agreed. She called Cochran and asked him to meet her on the steps of a main classroom building on campus. 2 hours later, they saw each other walking towards that spot. Cochran realized from where they were meeting that this wasn't going to be good news. He joined Myra as she walked to the steps, and they sat down. Cochran said, "So, I guess it's a no." "Yes, it's a no. I've accepted Ronnie's proposal." "Oh, you mean last night?" "Yes. I guess I pushed him into it." "Not really. He already had the ring." She showed him her hand. Myra had tears in her eyes. Cochran said, "I love you, Myra. I wish you the best." He hugged her briefly before walking away. She watched him until he turned a corner and was out of sight. She whispered to herself, "I love you too, Cochran." Her tears stopped as she walked back home. When she stepped inside, Ronnie was waiting for her. The excitement of her upcoming marriage almost made her forget the sadness from her talk with Cochran. Almost. The wedding was a small event at a golf club owned by Myra's father, James. A few friends from campus were invited. Alice, Terry, the math department, Brenda, Joshua, and, after some discussion, Cochran too. He felt he should attend since he was still practicing with the soccer team. There were no big celebrations. Cochran brought a lovely Scottish woman, Mary Dawson, who was visiting him. They were not serious but had a casual relationship at that time. After the wedding, they did get closer when Cochran returned to Edinburgh. By the end of the year, they were living together. After their honeymoon in Las Vegas, Myra and Ronnie settled in at Tech. Ronnie worked on his doctorate and taught classes. Myra, who had studied psychology, decided to pursue a master's in economics. They settled into their new roles. After the spring semester, they bought a house near campus, surrounded by 20 acres of woods. Myra started writing romance novels. She had completed a project on the trends in those books for her bachelor's degree, and Ronnie found her thesis very interesting. He wondered why some books succeeded while others did not. One evening, after a nice evening together, he said to Myra, "You could write those books. If you did, they'd be even better than the ones you study." Myra looked at him for a long moment before answering, "I have thought about it, Ronnie. Don't overthink. Just go for it." She smiled at him. "I already have. Well, I have a 30-page outline." She giggled, not letting Ronnie see it just yet. She felt that the story reflected a lot of her own life, and it might feel too personal. Thinking about it the next day, Ronnie understood. He decided to let it go and didn't ask again, though he was curious. Myra was writing a book to examine her love triangle. The characters had made up names, but anyone who knew them could recognize who was who. Myra finished the book in 6 weeks. She wrote quickly and confidently. In the story, Ronnie, named Mika, was shown as a straightforward and kind person. He was portrayed as clever and quite intelligent. Cochran, named Richard or Dick, was shown as adventurous in romance, always focused on his own needs, but he was also depicted as smart, funny, and carefree. Myra, named Mary, was described as a bright and beautiful woman. There was a scene where she turned down Dick's proposal and chose Mika instead. It felt very real and emotional. Myra let Ronnie read the draft before sending it to publishers. He finished it in one day and thought it would do very well. However, he felt uneasy knowing that friends and others would see it was about them. Still, he pushed that thought aside, knowing Myra had worked hard and that the book would succeed. He also recognized how emotionally tiring the process had been for her. Eventually, he became a bit worried about their relationship. This concern stemmed from the different dreams the main character had in the book. On one side, she wanted marriage, a family, and stability. On the other, she dreamed of being famous and admired by many. Ronnie saw himself as the family and stability, while he thought Cochran represented the other side. In the story, stability won, just as he hoped it would in real life. The book caught the attention of 3 publishers who wanted to buy it. Ronnie suggested she choose the one offering a smaller advance but a larger share of sales. She agreed, partly because that publisher promised quick release. The book was well advertised and quickly gained popularity after being published. The hardback edition featured a striking photo of Myra on the back cover. She looked stunning, and it likely helped with sales. Myra earned her MA in economics in 2 years, but by then she was already a recognized writer. She went on a 2-week book tour and started working on another book. Meanwhile, Ronnie earned his doctorate. Both he and Myra were doing quite well financially. Myra's second book was also successful. The characters were mostly different from her life except for one. The story was about a married woman who had a child with her Prince Charming, not her husband. She embarked on another book tour which lasted 3 weeks, including 4 days in Great Britain. She was not ready for the warm welcome she received there. As soon as she stepped out of the car that brought her from the airport, reporters and photographers surrounded her. They all wanted to know if Cochran Devlin was the real Dick in her first book. Cochran was famous in Scotland and now in England. He was very attractive, and his new partner, Mary Dawson, was an actress and model. The two made a striking couple and were often seen together in pictures. When Myra arrived at her hotel room, she checked her phone and saw headlines about Cochran and Mary being in London, since it was a break for Scottish football. Myra called Ronnie when she saw that news. He picked up right away. It was 4 in the afternoon on the U.S. East Coast. Myra told him she was safe and that there was a lot of excitement about Cochran. They talked for a bit. Ronnie asked, "Are you going to see him?" "Oh no. I didn't even know he was in town, and London is huge." Ronnie felt assured. Cochran and Mary were staying at the same fancy hotel as Myra. Myra had brought along a colleague from her publisher named Blaise Dunning for the trip. Blaise knew what kind of attention Myra would get in London. She was the one who had chosen the hotel, which was a smart move. Myra could expect good book sales, especially since the charming character in her new story resembled Cochran. Myra and Blaise were heading to a Waterstone store at Piccadilly for a book signing. As they left the hotel, they saw Cochran and Mary arriving in a limo, and a group of photographers were waiting outside. Myra and Blaise came out first, and pictures were taken. But when Cochran's limo showed up, he and Mary stepped out, and even more photos were snapped. Myra was surprised to see Cochran right there at her hotel. She looked back at Blaise with a puzzled expression. Blaise just shrugged and said, "More sales." Cochran noticed Myra standing on the steps with Mary. He looked pleased to see her, while Mary seemed less so. Cochran took Mary's hand and walked over to Myra, weaving through the crowd of press. Many videos were filmed during this moment. When they finally stood face to face, Cochran hugged Myra with playful air kisses. Mary did the same with Myra. Myra quietly said to Cochran, "I had no idea." But by the time she reached the bottom of the steps, photos and videos were already online. Once inside their limo, Myra remembered to call Ronnie, but then realized there was a 5-hour time difference. Her signing was set to start at 10 in the morning. She opted to text him instead. "I didn't know he was here. It was Blaise." Ronnie received the text at 7:30 in the morning. He quickly checked a news site and only waited a couple of minutes before finding the video of the meeting outside the hotel. He felt fortunate to read her message first, but wondered briefly if it was true. He also thought about the rest of Myra's trip to England. She planned to spend 3 of the 4 days in London and the last in Birmingham. Myra's signing lasted 2.5 hours. She really enjoyed the event, although she was frequently asked about Cochran. Her standard response was, "I'm married. He and I are not involved anymore." Some of the listeners looked unsure. Myra had a long conversation with Blaze in the limo. She made it clear that she didn't want to deal with the attention that Cochran brought. She asked for no more promotion like that. While she talked, she realized how pointless that request was. The situation was already complicated. Before lunch at the hotel, Myra called Ronnie. They had a good discussion. Ronnie said, "I understand about the book promotion. I know you didn't know about the fuss or that he was at the hotel. Just be careful. I can handle the pressure. It's not too bad here." That made Myra feel a bit better. Myra and Blaze were sitting at a round booth in the hotel restaurant when Cochran and Mary entered and chose seats next to them, with Cochran sitting next to Myra. Myra felt ready to end her work with Blaze right then, but Blaze raised her hands and said, "This wasn't my doing." Cochran smiled and said, "Myra, Mary and I are together. It's all good, right?" Myra replied, "Please tell everyone that." Mary said, "We didn't plan this, Myra. We were surprised to see you at the hotel." She looked at Blaze. Blaze said, "That was my mistake. I'm sorry, but it's already happened." A waiter came by and they all ordered sandwiches. Cochran had a beer. They enjoyed their meal, catching up on their lives. Afterwards, Myra and Blaze left for Foyles and Cecil Court for a signing and an interview with the BBC. The interview was conducted by a slick, polite man. About 5 minutes in, he asked Myra if the characters from her first book were based on real people. She simply replied, "Yes." Then she explained that she wrote the book for her own healing. This led to an interesting discussion about whether such books are a way of fulfilling desires. Blaze liked the interview, but thought it got too serious. The signing was lively, and Myra found it enjoyable. Women kept asking her about her relationship with Cochran. She would smile and reply, "Next question." The following days were similar. Before she left for Birmingham, Myra had dinner with Mary and Cochran without Blaze. While they enjoyed their appetizers, Mary asked, "Myra, do you still have feelings for my man here?" Myra was surprised by the question and asked, "Why do you ask?" "Because we wouldn't mind a visit tonight. Maybe we could invite Blaze." Cochran added, "You'd have many choices." Myra leaned back, blinking a few times. Then she said, "I'm married. I wouldn't betray my vows." Mary said, "All right, send Blaze then. Why isn't she here?" "She had things to take care of in Birmingham. You really want to see her?" Mary nodded eagerly. "Oh, yes, I would. So would Cochran. Blaze might not be as charming as you, but she's attractive, and I bet she'd be—" Cochran cut in. "She seems a bit distant. We'd like to see if we can move past that." Myra laughed as the waiter came to clear the plates. Once he left, she said, "I'll let her know about your interest, but I'll make sure she agrees not to write anything about it." She chuckled. Cochran grinned. "I should have done the same with you, my dear." They both laughed. Myra replied, "I knew you before you were rich and famous. Back then, neither of us had lawyers like we do now." Cochran smiled and said, "Maybe you should see if wealth and fame have changed me." Myra shook her head. "No, but thanks for the offer." Cochran smiled again. "Someday," he sang softly, "we'll be together." Myra said nothing. After leaving the restaurant, Myra stopped by Blaze's room. Blaze, a blonde woman in her mid-30s, was finishing a phone call with a plate of room-service lasagna in front of her. When the call ended, she looked up at Myra. "Cochran and Mary wanted me to tell you that they're inviting you to their room for some fun. No pressure on the dress code," Myra said with a small grin. Blaze stared at her for a moment before asking, "Is this something you've already turned down?" Yes, but you might enjoy yourself. I'm not sure how you'd feel about Mary, though." Blaze stood up, put on some sneakers, and walked with Myra out of the room. Myra simply said, "Room 1012, have fun." Blaze pressed the elevator button, and Myra returned to her own room. She called Ronnie to share the story, and Ronnie found it amusing. He had always found Blaze attractive, although he never mentioned it to Myra. But Myra knew. The next morning, on their ride to Birmingham, Myra asked Blaze about her night, and Blaze gave her a detailed account, which we'll skip here. Myra couldn't help but think about her memories with Cochran. She also realized how much she missed Ronnie after being away for 2 weeks. She was relieved that Mary and Cochran were heading back to Edinburgh. Myra enjoyed her time in Birmingham. The bookstore across from the Bull Ring was a favorite spot, and she and Blaze spent some time shopping. However, Myra preferred the local street vendors downhill. They woke up early the next day and headed to Heathrow for a noon flight. Myra was happy to be back home with Ronnie. He managed to survive her absence, just barely. Soon after, Myra and Ronnie decided it was time to start a family. Within 2 months, Myra was pregnant, and twins ran in her family, so they had 2 children, Robert, named after her uncle, and Beth. 5 years later, Cochran called Myra, and they agreed to meet for dinner. Now, here she was, dressed up and driving out of town to meet him. The twins were at her parents' house for the weekend, and Ronnie was 3 hours away, not expected back until Sunday afternoon. And Myra, she wasn't quite sure how far things would go with Cochran. Recently, Myra had been feeling restless. Ronnie was still entertaining, but many guys were showing interest in her, and some of them were quite charming. Her 3rd book tour had gone well, but there were a couple of moments when she almost agreed to go to a hotel room with a flirty guy. In short, she was feeling a bit tempted. So when Cochran called her, she decided to meet him for dinner. They chose a quiet hotel, the Harold Hotel and Spa, where she figured she wouldn't run into anyone she knew. She had visited it once before with Cochran, and while the food was decent, they also had a DJ for dancing after dinner. Myra was not completely fooling herself about what might happen after dinner. She knew they would go dancing and then possibly end up in his room. The thought made her a bit excited, yet she still had reservations. She thought to herself that she would let the night unfold and see if her attraction or her family mattered more. Ronnie had started to notice that something was off with Myra. He had heard about her close calls during the book tour from a friend named Blaze. When he asked Myra about it, she shrugged it off as just a little slip because of drinks. No big deal, but Ronnie saw it differently. He decided to install a hidden program on her phone just to keep an eye on things. It was called Grapevine. When he traveled to Philadelphia, he asked Myra what her plans were for the week. By then, she already knew Cochran would be in town, so Ronnie was aware too. Besides the phone information, Blaze had also shared that Cochran would be at Tech because she had made plans to meet his wife, Mary, in New York while he was away. Ronnie cared deeply for his family, including his children, who brightened his days, and he had always loved Myra since they first met. However, he wasn't willing to allow her to stray, especially without him knowing. As Ronnie headed to Philadelphia, he was already aware that Myra planned to meet Cochran, including the time and place. He had a Skype meeting with someone who managed the hotel, a man named Barry Mankin. Luckily, he knew Barry, which made arrangements easier. They discussed the details, including the DJ for the evening. As Myra drove toward the hotel, she felt less troubled about the evening. The drive calmed her nerves. She arrived just before 7 and handed her keys to the valet. After a quick stop in the restroom to freshen up, she walked to the restaurant where Cochran was waiting for her in a booth. When they greeted each other, they embraced and took a seat. Cochran had become even more successful than before. Now, he played for a big team in London, and his personal life with Mary often made the news. They openly acknowledged having an unconventional marriage. As Myra greeted Cochran, she noticed he seemed even more appealing. His face had matured, and he appeared more fit. He had a neat beard and longer hair tied in a braid at the back. Myra remembered their past fondly, but she hadn't seen him recently. As soon as they started talking, she felt drawn to him. They shared a meal, stealing glances at each other by the flickering candlelight. Cochran's smile was charming. He seemed confident about himself and the night ahead. Why else would Myra visit him like this? Dinner went on. They enjoyed light dishes. Then they heard music from the DJ. They found a small table near the dance floor, which was already lively with people. Myra and Cochran danced to various songs, both fast and slow. It was clear to everyone watching that they were connecting. Among the onlookers was Ronnie. He was watching the venue's security feed from his room in Philadelphia. When he noticed Myra and Cochran getting close to going upstairs, he sent a signal. When Myra heard the familiar intro to a song by Marvin Gaye, she stopped in her tracks. It was a song Ronnie liked. She heard the DJ say, "This one goes out to Myra from her husband, Ronnie." Then the lyrics played, and she was overwhelmed. She quickly left the dance floor and headed for the entrance. The song's chorus followed her as she gave her keys to the valet. Ronnie saw Myra rush away from Cochran and took a moment to feel pleased about it. But soon, his phone rang. It was Myra. He chose not to answer, letting it go to voicemail. He listened to her voice, filled with urgency. Ronnie, I love you. I'm going home. Please pick up. I love you." He didn't answer. Instead, he turned off the video feed and went to the hotel's bar. Myra drove home carefully, aware that she had some wine and was feeling anxious. She arrived safely. Trying Ronnie's phone again, she hoped he had calmed down. She began to question how he arranged the song dedication, but it puzzled her. Her biggest worry was the thought that Ronnie might end their relationship. She briefly contemplated lying about her plans, but found it silly to even consider. By the time she called a second time, Ronnie was asleep in his room. He had thought about what to do after the night had unfolded as it had, but he hadn't reached a final decision. Still, sleep came to him. On Sunday evening, Ronnie returned home. He hadn't answered any of Myra's calls or those from her mother. Myra's messages were all apologies, seeking forgiveness. Ronnie felt impressed as he listened to them, noticing that she offered no excuses, only heartfelt apologies. In the end, it was her honesty that saved her. If she had told him just one lie, he would have walked away. When Ronnie came home, the twins rushed to greet him. Myra stayed back. It was dinner time and they had been eating pizza. Ronnie grabbed a slice, but he barely acknowledged Myra, only exchanging a few short words. After dinner, Ronnie played with the twins until bedtime, letting Myra tuck them in. He waited for her in the living room. When she came in, she hesitated before speaking. "I messed up and you saved me. You really saved me. I hope we can move past this. I love you." Ronnie looked at her. "Yeah, me and Cochran too," she sighed. "Ronnie, I have feelings for him. You know that. But I chose you. I've been restless lately. The guys on the book tour. Now this. Right now, I'm not someone you can trust. I don't even know why this happened." Ronnie nodded and asked, "If we stay married, how will I ever trust you again?" "You can't right now. I understand that. But you didn't trust me before your trip either. How did you even know what I was doing?" "Word gets around. And I know someone who works at that spa." She stared at him, sensing he wasn't being completely open. He added, "You know, if I had found out later, we'd be done. I shouldn't have had to save you, Myra. I know, but I need to figure out why I did it. It wasn't just the drinks with those guys on the tour, and I knew what might happen if I went to see Cochran. So you're saying you need something more than what I can give you? You're wonderful. You know that. It's not about that. It's more about me. Something inside me." Ronnie nodded but said, "We never really talked about what you had with Cochran and what you gave up. You and he are very different. And that was a long time ago. We've both changed since then. So maybe it's not even about him. Maybe it's something inside of me. A hidden flaw, perhaps," Ronnie said thoughtfully. Myra gave a small smile. "That sounds like the title of a song. But right now, what I feel isn't hidden." She stepped closer and kissed him firmly. Ronnie didn't pull away. When Myra was feeling confident and bold, Ronnie usually let her take the lead. They were pretty evenly matched in strength, though Ronnie was the better runner. But Myra could hold her own. This time, however, when they moved to the bedroom, Ronnie took charge. He gently but firmly guided her to the bed, showing his strength. They shared a moment of intense closeness, reconnecting after the strain between them as they found comfort in each other's arms. He growled at her as he did it. This wasn't the first time Ronnie had acted the way he just did, but it had been a few years since. Actually, one time led to the twins. Usually, he and Myra enjoyed playful moments, sharing kisses and affection before connecting deeply. But now, Ronnie wasn't in a playful mood. Myra felt the same. She understood what was happening. Even when Ronnie showed her more intimacy, she was still engaged. Ronnie got up and nodded to her before heading for a shower. When he returned, drying off, he saw Myra sitting on the bed looking at him. "Are you going to act like that every time I make a mistake?" she asked. "No. The next time might be the last," he replied. "Maybe this time is the last. It will be the last time I mess up. I promise. Ronnie looked at her on the bed. She looked amazing. It would be hard to let her go. They snuggled together and fell asleep. So, he sort of forgave her. His heart wanted to, but his mind reminded him to be careful. He knew why Myra felt drawn to these intense moments. She sometimes liked to be swept away. He felt that way too. He thought he could give her that thrill again if she allowed him. But other men could sweep her away without her wanting it. He remembered what Blaze told him about two men who nearly took advantage of her last time. They were big and bold. Ronnie understood why Myra married him instead of those other men. She wanted stability and a family. She wished to be a mom and wife. With him, she could have that. Those other men were not right for her. Ronnie worried that someday she might want freedom in their relationship. That thought made him sad. He would have to figure out what to do when that day came. About a month after dinner with Cochran, Myra became pregnant. They talked it over and decided she would stop taking the pill. She even wrote her 4th book while expecting and finished it just as their daughter, Linda, was born. Having Linda and the twins helped Myra find balance. Her book tour turned mostly virtual. With little Linda, life was busy. At 3, Linda started preschool for half-days. Myra and Ronnie felt happy about that, especially when she began all-day kindergarten. Ronnie felt less worried about Myra's loyalty. But now that she was 36 and had free time during the days, she decided to go on another book tour, not with Blaze this time. Myra figured out who had shared her private moments. The new publicist was Laverne Blandon. Before Myra agreed to the tour, she and Ronnie talked about it. She felt a bit pushed into agreeing because of a clause in her new contract. Ronnie brought it up 10 days before she was to leave for New York, the first stop. After the kids were asleep that night, Ronnie asked, "Myra, are we going to have problems with this tour?" Myra understood what he meant. She replied, "Maybe. Honestly, maybe. Oh, Ronnie, I feel uncertain." "Maybe I should surprise you more often," he joked. She smiled. "No, I like you just the way you are, Ronnie. I know you see my doubts. Would this cause us trouble?" He didn't answer and just shrugged. She continued, "You'd end up resenting me. I wouldn't be able to handle that." "You can always say no. Maybe I can, but I do have a desire sometimes, and I don't think you'd leave me." "I don't agree with that, Myra. I won't do anything like that. I saw this coming, and I thought a lot about it." "And?" "I wouldn't actually resent you, Myra, but it would change everything. We'd never be the same. Remember, what we have is built on respect. I get tempted too, you know." "Yeah, that tall woman from the chemistry department. Barbara. Yes, she's not the only one I notice, but I stay loyal." "Okay, I won't do anything either, but Ronnie, if you want to talk about anything, I'm here." "I won't. We have kids. What would they think of us?" "That we're allowed to be human." "Nah, I'm gonna set your phone so you know when I call." "What does that mean?" "Grapevine." He smiled. Myra managed the tour without much trouble. Twice she felt tempted. Once during dinner with a movie agent, and once when she met an actor interested in buying the movie rights to her first book. Blake Donovan looked impressive but was all about business, so she didn't pursue anything with him. She realized that if he had made a move, she might have been in trouble. When Myra came home, she told Ronnie all about the trip and the temptations she faced. Her mention of Blake Donovan made him uneasy, but she reminded him that no harm had been done. That night he took her to bed, and they shared a gentle and light-hearted moment together. When Blake Donovan bought the movie rights and invited her to help with the script, she politely said no. She never asked Ronnie for a break. She never gave in. Who would have thought? Another surprise. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.